The halls and dorm rooms at the Salvation Army Emergency Shelter in Calgary, Alberta are eerily quiet these days. They recently announced the closure of 131 emergency beds, but not for the reasons you might think.
Hi guys, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, how are you, Eric?
Pretty good.
Things all quiet over here these days?
Oh yeah, quiet.
This is part of a citywide plan to reallocate funds, placing many of Calgary's homeless, like Gary Sitsema, in permanent housing instead of shuffling them from shelter to shelter. For Sitsema, this news is a welcome relief. Finally, he says, he has a place to call home.
I can come home at the end of the day, I can put my feet up, and I can feel satisfied that I was a giving part of society. Right, because I have my address, I have my postal code, I give to society now by working and paying my taxes, and it's just huge what it does for my dignity.
3 years ago, the Calgary Homeless Foundation created a 10-year plan to end homelessness. Tim Richtor led the project.
Calgary realized that it had a homeless problem that was getting worse and worse. In fact, Calgary had Canada's fastest growing homeless population between 1992 and 2006. So in the summer of 2006, the latest homeless count had come out. It had gone up 30% from the 2 years before that. Just a staggering number.
After consulting with some experts in the area of homelessness, Richtor realized that it was going to cost more to ignore the problem than to do something about it.
So the community rallied around that idea. Calgary became Canada's first city to have a 10-year plan to end homelessness.
Among some of the first to come forward were members of the faith community.
Well, the faith community has always been on the front line and among the first to respond to need in the community, right? They put up shelters, they house people, they'll support people, they provide warm clothes, and they're this remarkable resource in Calgary.
The Salvation Army has been on the front lines in Calgary for more than 100 years. In 1989, they opened the Booth Centre to provide shelter for those with no place to stay. There was no hesitation to get on board with the 10-year plan to end homelessness, and the results speak for themselves. Within 3 years, more than 2,500 people have found permanent housing.
A year ago on any given day, there were 200 empty beds in the city at around the various shelters. So we've been working to say, where can we assist in this? And the decision was made that the Salvation Army would close 131 emergency shelter beds here at the Booth Centre. The facility is owned by the provincial government and was funded. And so Housing and Urban Affairs decided that they would then direct the funding that was basically paying for empty beds into other supports for those in need in our community.
Tim Richtor says the shift in focus from primarily emergency response to providing permanent housing has not been easy for all involved, but says the Salvation Army has been a great model.
This transition from managing homelessness and providing shelter and providing care and support to ending homelessness and moving people from the street, from shelters, into housing requires a lot of soul searching because they've done the same thing the same way for years. Right. And we're making a pretty dynamic shift. And so it was interesting, and it was really exciting that they were among the first to say, okay, actually our shelters aren't needed anymore, so we're going to stop doing that. We're going to begin to shift our focus.
As much as we try to make our facilities feel like home, it's not home. And for the Salvation Army, we want to help people restore their dignity so that they have a name. God knows each person by name. And how awful to live in a world where you feel like nobody knows you or nobody cares about you. And so we want to help people to have a place that they can call home and that they can be called by name and have their dignity restored.
Richtor says that the 10-year plan's mantra, housing first, came from asking the homeless what they needed, rather than assuming what it was.
There's a great story out of one of our outreach teams, a couple who had been living under a cardboard box in an alley in downtown Calgary for all of 7 years. Nobody had ever asked them, if they'd like someplace to live, if they'd like an apartment. So the outreach team went up to them and said, they used to sort of hand out sandwiches and the basic sort of essentials, blankets to keep them warm while they're homeless. They went up to this couple and said, so could we interest you in an apartment? And they're like, well, yeah, I'm living in a cardboard box in an alley, of course you could.
Which is exactly what Gary Sitsema wanted. Although riddled with a crack cocaine addiction and needing help, he didn't like turning to emergency shelters.
I didn't like it. I didn't feel safe, which led me to, that was part of the other part of my bottom that led me to get help. I was at the Dream Center for 8.5 months before I finally got into external housing, which we're at today.
The Calgary Dream Center is not an emergency shelter. They work with men wanting to find their way back in society through an extended in-house recovery program for 125 men and a more recent initiative in conjunction with the 10-year plan to end homelessness. They have been purchasing properties to provide permanent housing for the men who complete their recovery program.
The goals of the Dream Center is to have more men in the community stabilized, having jobs, enjoying life, and back into their regular routine than the number of men in the Dream Center.
Moore knows that these goals are a challenge and says he takes no credit personally for how things have progressed.
It's a God operation. Without the Lord helping us, giving us wisdom and direction, and the 600 churches that are in Calgary, they all know about the Dream Center. We have a number of them partnering with us, volunteers, as well as giving us resources, and we're just very thankful for the faith community.
Richtor of the Calgary Homeless Foundation says that for the 10-year plan to be fully successful, there must be support systems in place for those moving into permanent housing.
And that can range everything from, mental health care, addiction treatment, physical health. It could require some help with budgeting or money management, but it could simply be for some, a caring ear, somebody that's going to show an interest and help them begin to feel normal again.
Gary Sitsema has now started working for the Dream Center and has access to ongoing support and counseling as needed. But he says that the support has extended beyond that now.
But I have my family back in my life too, right? So I mean, I can phone my mother and we can actually have a conversation now, whereas before we couldn't. The trust wasn't there, right? So I mean, just by doing what I've done, I've gained other avenues of support, whether it be family, whether it be the Dream Center, whether it be just friends. I have friends that are back in my life that are willing to help, right? They reach out to me.
And most importantly, he has been able to reconnect with his 9-year-old daughter.
When we were in church on Sunday, they were pointing out people that made milestones. On Sunday, I actually reached my year of clean time. And my daughter put her head on my shoulder and said, "I'm proud of you, Dad." And I forget the next 10 minutes because I couldn't, words can't describe how that felt. But I have the respect and the love of my daughter in my life, and that's huge.
We have an obligation as Christians or not, that we need to step up to help people. And helping people is not keeping them in shelter. Helping people is a home, like everybody else, despite their many flaws. Addiction, mental illness, bad behavior, right? We need to reach out to the most vulnerable, get them off the streets, out of shelters, and into a home. We're going to end homelessness one person at a time.
In the past year, since this story first went to air, much progress has been made in the 10-year plan to end homelessness. Gary Sitsema continues to do well on his journey of recovery, and according to Tim Richtor, the faith community has increased its participation in this plan, including their involvement right here at Acadia Place.
What's really exciting that we can talk about this year is that for the first time in 20 years of counting, homelessness in our city has gone down. It's down by about 11.5% over 2008. And you remember that Calgary had the fastest growing rate of homelessness between 1992 and 2008. We've managed to turn that around in the city, which is really, really exciting.
Richtor is quick to say that the involvement of the faith community in projects like Acadia Place is one of the core reasons the numbers have turned around and are holding steady.
The faith community is really has an important role to play in embracing people, welcoming them back in the community, helping them build that supportive, normal relationships that we all enjoy, but have to be rebuilt if you're leaving homelessness. And Acadia Place, that's a great example of where a group of churches have gotten together and are welcoming people into their community.
This group of churches is called Kairos Calgary, a committee consisting of 130 churches in Calgary from 10 different denominations dedicated to work on the issue of homelessness. Geoff Zakaib is the chair of this committee and says that a couple of years ago they decided to join the efforts of the 10-year plan to end homelessness and have helped develop Acadia Place as a community for families experiencing homelessness.
There's 58 units here, and one thing that's unique about Acadia Place is there's a high proportion of 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments. So it was absolutely perfect for the kind of programs that we were trying to run to help homeless families.
Zakaib says that Kairos Calgary has 2 goals in their involvement with Acadia Place. The first is to fundraise to pay off the remaining $3 million of the $9 million mortgage.
The second major objective is to use the church community to provide support to the families that are here at Acadia Place.
Support includes a full-time community outreach worker to work with the families, as well as many volunteers to help with the different projects like fall and spring cleanup at the complex, as well as the beautiful new playground.
It was just amazing. In about 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours, 200 people came together, faith community, people from various stores around Acadia Place, some police and firefighters, all came together. It was a terrible day. It was raining, it was pouring. This place was all full of mud. But the transformation, starting in the morning and by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, this whole playground was built, and then the kids were playing on it. It was just fabulous to see all those people come together for this cause.
Richtor says that the ultimate goal is to see homelessness come to an end in Calgary. And what does that look like?
An end to homelessness is when no person spends more than 7 days outside or in a shelter. We think we can achieve that quickly. We think by January 2018 we'll be there. We're well on our way.
You have to break the cycle, right? That's what it really takes, because it's tragic, right? That you get caught in that, and you have to break it somewhere. So that's by building the community. That's really what we're trying to do.
In Calgary, Natalie Faith for 100 Huntley Street.